When they told me my son was getting married, I smiled like any proud father would. But when I learned I wasn't invited, I stayed quiet. I didn't argue, didn't demand explanations. I just sat there on the porch that evening, watching the sun melt behind the rooftops, and whispered to myself, "So, this is how life turns." My name is David Miller. I'm 63 now. I worked most of my life as an auto mechanic in a small suburban town outside Chicago. Not rich, not famous, just a man who fixed cars, paid bills, and tried to raise his boy right. His name is Ethan. My only child. When his mother, Linda, passed away 10 years ago, it was just the two of us left. I thought we'd always have that bond, the kind that stays even when words don't. But somewhere along the way, life drifted. When Ethan got into college, he started seeing the world differently. Bigger dreams, better circles. He wanted success, fast and shiny. I admired his drive, even if I couldn't always understand his choices. He moved to the city, found a corporate job, and I stayed behind, fixing engines and collecting quiet evenings. I knew I wasn't part of his new world. The suits, the business dinners, the luxury apartments, I didn't fit in there. But I never complained. I'd send him messages, sometimes a little too long, sometimes too simple, "How's work, son?" or "Proud of you, keep going." He replied at first. Then slowly, the replies stopped coming. Weeks became months. The last time I saw him was 2 years ago, on his 30th birthday. I drove down to the city with a gift, a simple leather watch I'd saved up for. When he opened it, he smiled politely, but I could feel the distance in his eyes. His girlfriend, Rachel, stood beside him, elegant and graceful in her silk dress. She thanked me with a soft smile, but I knew. I could see it. She came from money, the kind that didn't know how to see men like me. And maybe that's where it began. A few months later, I heard from an old neighbor that Ethan had gotten engaged. Not from Ethan himself, not even a call. Just a passing mention from someone who saw it on social media. I looked at the photo, him in a black suit, her in a golden dress, their smiles perfect, their world polished. My heart didn't break that day. It simply grew quieter. I told myself, maybe he's busy. Maybe he'll call. He didn't. When the wedding invitation finally came, it wasn't meant for me. It went to people who had money, influence, and connections. Not to the man who held his hand when he learned to walk. Not to the man who sold his old truck to pay for his first semester of college. I found out about the wedding 2 weeks after it happened. Through a picture that appeared in the local paper, corporate strategist Ethan Miller marries Rachel Preston, daughter of Preston Industries CEO. There it was, a line about prestige and power. My name wasn't mentioned anywhere. Just, late mother Linda Miller. As if I never existed. That night, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of black coffee, the silence pressing on me heavier than ever. I could have been angry. I could have called him, shouted, demanded an answer. But instead, I laughed quietly to myself and said, he's living the life he thinks he wants. And that's when I decided to send him a gift, not out of spite, but something different. Something that would remind him of where he came from. Something simple, honest, unforgettable. I didn't have much money. My savings were modest. But I had something more valuable, memories. So I took an old wooden box from the attic. Inside were little pieces of his childhood, a drawing he made in first grade, the small baseball glove I'd bought him when he was 10, the photo of us fixing the old Chevy in the garage. On the back of that photo, in fading ink, I had written, "You can go anywhere in life, son. Just never forget where home is." I wrapped the box carefully. Added one more thing, my watch. The same leather watch I'd given him years ago, the one he never wore. I placed it on top, with a note that read, "Time doesn't stop for anyone. But it always remembers who taught it to tick." Then, I mailed it to his office. No message, no address for me, just the gift. I don't know how he reacted. Days passed, weeks went by. No calls, No letters. But in my heart, I knew one day he'd open it, and he'd remember. Maybe not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But someday, when the lights dim and the applause fades, he'll realize that silence sometimes speaks louder than words. And that's how my story begins. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with a quiet kind of justice. The kind that life delivers in its own time. After I sent that box, I didn't expect much. I went back to my days the way I always did, quietly, simply, almost like nothing had changed. My mornings started early. Old habits don't fade easily. I'd wake up before sunrise, put on the same gray sweater, and make myself black coffee with a slice of toast. The kitchen clock ticked louder these days, maybe because the house had grown quieter since Linda passed. Sometimes I'd catch myself speaking out loud, only to realize I wasn't talking to anyone. I still kept her chair by the window. The one with the floral cushion she loved. Every morning I'd wipe it clean, as if she might sit there again one day. Old love never really dies, it just becomes part of the air you breathe. After breakfast, I'd walk down to the corner shop to buy the newspaper. I didn't need to, most of the news I already knew from the TV, but it gave me a reason to talk to someone. The shop owner, Mike, was an old friend. He'd wave when he saw me coming. "Morning, Dave." "Same paper." "Same one," I'd reply. "Can't let the world go on without knowing, can I?" He'd laugh and hand me the folded paper, sometimes slipping in a free candy bar. "For the road," he'd say. We'd chat about baseball, weather, politics, the kind of small talk that fills empty spaces in old men's lives. He once asked about Ethan. "How's your boy doing?" "Still in the city." I smiled. "Yeah, still chasing the big world." He nodded. "Good for him. You must be proud." I just said, "Always have been." And that was that. No need to explain what pride feels like when it's mixed with a little bit of pain. When I came back home, I'd sit in the garage for hours. Even though I'd retired 2 years ago, the smell of engine oil and metal still comforted me. I kept my old tools polished, lined up neatly. Sometimes I'd fix small things for neighbors, a broken lawnmower, a loose pipe, anything to keep my hands busy. It's funny, fixing things came naturally to me. But when it came to people, especially my own son, I never quite knew where to start. The neighborhood had changed over the years. Younger families moved in, with their new cars and their busy lives. They'd wave politely when passing by, but we lived in different worlds. I was the old man with the dusty car and the quiet porch. Some evenings, kids played football in the street, and I'd watch from my steps, sipping coffee, feeling a strange mix of joy and distance. On weekends, I'd drive out to the lake Linda used to love. I'd bring a sandwich, park under the old willow tree, and sit for hours watching the water move. It was my way of staying connected, not just to her, but to the parts of myself I didn't show to anyone anymore. Sometimes I'd see families there, fathers teaching their kids to fish, mothers unpacking sandwiches. I'd smile at them, though sometimes that smile carried a weight I couldn't explain. I wondered if Ethan ever remembered those summer days when I used to take him here. He'd run along the shore, his laughter echoing across the water. "Dad, look!" I caught one. He'd shout, even when it was just a leaf. I remember telling him back then, "You don't have to catch something to have a good day, son. Just being here is enough." Now, years later, I realized I was the one living by those words. I hadn't caught much in life, not money, not fame, but I had peace, and that was something. One evening, I received a letter in the mail, an invitation addressed to Mr. David Miller. My heart jumped for a second. Maybe Ethan had finally reached out. But when I opened it, it wasn't from him. It was a flyer from a local community center looking for volunteers to teach basic mechanics to teenagers. I don't know why, but I kept that paper on the table for days. I read it over and over, not because I was sure I wanted to do it, but because it reminded me I still had something to offer. The next week, I decided to visit the center. The place was small, but full of energy, kids laughing, the smell of paint and fresh ideas everywhere. The director, a kind woman named Susan, greeted me with a smile. "Mr. Miller, we'd love to have you if you're interested. You can teach once or twice a week, whatever fits your schedule." I hesitated. "I'm not much of a teacher." She smiled softly. "You've lived, haven't you? That's teaching enough." And so, I started showing up every Thursday afternoon. I taught them how to change tires, how to listen to an engine's rhythm, how to respect their tools. But more than that, we talked about life, about patience, about not giving up when something doesn't start right away. Those kids reminded me of Ethan at that age. Curious, eager, full of questions. There was one boy, Tommy, maybe 16, who stayed behind after every class. His father wasn't around, and I could tell he missed that presence. One day he asked, "Mr. Miller, do you have kids?" I paused for a moment. "Yeah. A son." "Does he help you in the garage?" I smiled faintly. "Not anymore. He's got his own world now." Tommy looked down. "Must be nice though, knowing you raised someone who's doing well." I thought about that long after he left. It was nice. Even if I wasn't part of that world anymore, I had helped him reach it. Maybe that was enough. Life went on like that, quiet, steady. I'd teach, come home, make dinner, and sometimes talk to Linda's picture. I'd tell her about my day, about the kids, about how Ethan's name still echoed in my heart even when my lips stayed silent. Then one evening, something unexpected happened. While cleaning the garage, I found an old voice recorder, one Ethan had used in high school for his speeches. Out of curiosity, I pressed play. A young voice filled the air, full of energy and innocence. "Dad, if you're hearing this, it means I finally figured out how to record. When I grow up, I'm gonna be like you. You fix everything, and you never give up." I froze. My hands trembled slightly. For a moment, I was back in that garage 20 years ago, with him standing beside me, holding a wrench twice his size. I could almost hear his laughter. That small recording reminded me of who he used to be, before the world got louder, before success became the only measure of worth. I sat there for a long time after that. Not sad, not angry, just full. Full of memories, full of love, full of acceptance. I realized that even if he forgot, I didn't have to. I could remember for both of us. That night, I decided to write him a letter. Not one to send, just one to write. Sometimes writing helps release what speaking can't. "Dear Ethan," I wrote. "I saw your wedding picture. You both looked beautiful. I'm happy for you, truly. I wish I could have been there, but maybe it's better this way. Sometimes life separates us so we can understand love without needing to be seen. I hope you find happiness, real happiness, not the kind that fades when the lights go out. And if someday you remember where you came from, know that the door here never locks." I folded that letter and placed it inside my desk drawer, right beside Linda's old ring. Maybe one day, he'd find it. Or maybe he wouldn't. Either way, the words were real. And that's what mattered. As days passed, I noticed something change inside me. The bitterness that used to visit in the quiet hours stopped coming. Instead, there was peace, the kind that doesn't depend on apologies. I realized that sometimes, forgiveness isn't for the other person. It's for you. It's what keeps your heart from rusting. But peace doesn't mean life stops teaching you. No, life always finds a way to circle back, to test if you've really learned. I didn't know it then, but my next lesson was already on its way, and it would arrive in a way I never expected. It had been almost 6 months since Ethan's wedding when the first ripple of change reached my quiet life. It came in the most ordinary way, through the mail. That morning, I was sorting bills when I found an envelope with no return address. Inside, there was a photo. Ethan and Rachel, smiling in front of a house, a big one, with tall glass windows and a neatly trimmed lawn. On the back, in neat handwriting, were the words, "We finally bought our first home." There was no message, no signature. Just that. For a long time, I stared at the photo. They looked happy, that kind of glossy happiness that photographs often exaggerate. But what caught my attention wasn't their smiles. It was the background, a small wooden box on the table behind them. My box. The one I had sent. He had kept it. Maybe Rachel didn't even know what it was. Maybe Ethan didn't tell her. But it was there, sitting quietly behind them, like a ghost from a different life. That small detail, that tiny box in the corner of the frame, warmed something deep inside me. Still, I didn't reach out. I had made peace with silence. But silence doesn't always last forever. A few weeks later, I got a call from the community center. "Mr. Miller," Susan said, her voice softer than usual, "we're organizing a charity car repair drive for families who can't afford maintenance. Would you like to help lead it?" "Of course," I replied without thinking. "When?" "This Saturday." "Oh, and the Preston Foundation is sponsoring it. Rachel Preston, actually. Maybe you've heard of her." I froze for a second. Rachel Preston. Ethan's wife. The universe has a strange sense of humor. I hadn't seen my son in 2 years, hadn't heard his voice in months, and now I'd be standing under a tent with his wife's name printed across the banner. That Saturday, I showed up early. The air smelled of fresh paint and gasoline, familiar comforts. Volunteers moved around setting up tables and banners. I wore my old denim jacket and cap, the same one I'd worn the day Ethan learned to change his first tire. Around 10, the fancy cars started pulling in. I could always tell which people had never held a wrench in their life. Soft hands, quick smiles. Then, among them, I saw her, Rachel. She was talking to one of the event coordinators, her posture graceful, her expression polished. She looked exactly like she did in the wedding photo. I didn't approach her. I just watched from a distance, tightening bolts and checking oil. After a while, she began walking around, greeting volunteers. Eventually, she stopped near my station. "Thank you for helping today," she said politely, not recognizing me. I looked up. "Just doing what I know best." She smiled, that rehearsed kind of smile that comes with public life. "You're good at it. My husband's terrible with cars." I chuckled softly. "I know." She laughed lightly, but then her smile faded just a bit. "Have we met before?" "Maybe in another lifetime," I said quietly, and went back to my work. Before she could ask more, someone called her over. She turned and walked away. I didn't see her again after that. But that night, something stirred inside me, not pain, not pride, just the awareness that fate had brushed past me again, whispering that my story with Ethan wasn't finished yet. About a month later, one of the boys from the community center, Tommy, came running into the garage. "Mr. Miller. There's someone here asking for you." I wiped my hands and stepped outside. Standing there, in a crisp gray suit, was Ethan. He looked older, not in years but in the eyes. His usual confidence had cracks now. He didn't say anything at first. We just stood there, 2 worlds apart but bound by the same silence. Finally he spoke. "Hi, Dad." "Ethan." He looked around the garage. Still the same smell. "Old habits," I said, trying to smile. He hesitated, his voice lower now. "I got your box. I should have called." "You didn't have to." "No, I did." He took a deep breath. "I didn't invite you to the wedding because I thought you wouldn't fit in. Rachel's family, her father, they're different. I didn't want you to feel uncomfortable." I looked at him, steady and calm. "So you protected me by erasing me?" He winced. "I know how that sounds. I was wrong. Completely wrong." For a moment, I didn't speak. I could have told him everything, how it felt, how lonely those days were, but I didn't. Instead, I said, "You did what you thought was right at the time. We all make choices." He nodded, his shoulders softening. "Rachel found out last month. She was angry at me. She said what I did was selfish. He paused. She saw that old box on our table and asked about it. That's when I told her. So he had kept it all this time. I felt something shift inside me, a quiet forgiveness that didn't need words. I don't blame you, son, I said. We live, we learn. That's how life goes. He looked at me for a long time, eyes glistening. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I smiled faintly. Maybe not. But it's yours anyway. We stood there in silence for a while. Sometimes silence heals faster than any speech. Over the next few months, he started visiting once in a while. Never long, just enough to share a cup of coffee, help fix a car, talk about the weather. Rachel came once too. She brought a basket of homemade cookies and looked at me with genuine warmth this time. I've heard a lot about you, she said. Hopefully not all bad, I replied, smiling. Only that you make the best coffee in the world. That made me laugh. Slowly, the air between us cleared. It wasn't the same as before, but something gentle began to grow, like spring quietly reclaiming ground after a long winter. But peace, as I'd learned, never comes without a test. One evening, Ethan called. His voice was strained. Dad, are you free tomorrow? I suppose I am. Could you come by the house? I need to talk. When I arrived, the house felt colder than I remembered. Rachel greeted me with a faint smile and excused herself upstairs. Ethan sat in the living room, staring at a pile of documents. He looked tired, the kind of tired that no sleep can fix. What's going on? I asked. He sighed heavily. The company Rachel's father owns. Preston Industries. It's under investigation. Some of the investments went bad, and now they're blaming me for mismanagement. Were you involved? I signed some papers, but I didn't know what I was signing at the time. Rachel's father handled everything. Now it's falling apart, and he's cutting me loose. I watched him, not with judgment, but with quiet understanding. The proud, ambitious son who once left his roots behind was now facing the same world that had praised him, turning its back just as quickly. He rubbed his temples. I might lose everything, Dad. The job, the house, even Rachel's been distant lately. I leaned forward. Ethan, I can't fix your problems. But I can remind you of something. This isn't the end. You were raised to build things, not to depend on others to build them for you. He looked up at me, tears hiding behind his eyes. How do you stay so calm? Because I've lost things too, I said. And I learned that panic doesn't rebuild anything. We sat quietly for a while. Then he said, almost to himself, I should have invited you. Maybe if I had, I'd have learned from you sooner. I smiled faintly. Life has its own invitations, son. Sometimes they just arrive late. The next few months were difficult for him. News spread about the company's collapse. Rachel's father's name was in the papers. Rachel herself withdrew from the public eye. And Ethan, he lost his job. The house went up for sale soon after. One afternoon, I found him standing outside my garage again, this time without a suit. Just jeans, a plain shirt, and tired eyes. Need some help? I asked. He smiled faintly. If you'll have me. And just like that, we began working together again. Side by side, fixing engines like we used to. No business suits, no cameras, no distance. Just oil, sweat, and quiet laughter. At first, he worked clumsily. His hands weren't used to hard work anymore. But day by day, he found his rhythm again. This feels right, he said one afternoon, tightening a bolt. Like I'm finally doing something real. It always was real, I said. You just needed to remember. One evening, we sat on the porch, watching the sunset. He looked at me and said, You know, Dad, when I saw that old box again, I realized something. The world I tried to build, it was made of glass. But you built yours from something stronger. I just didn't see it before. I smiled quietly. We all build glass houses, Ethan. The trick is learning to live gently inside them. He nodded slowly, understanding what I meant. Life had found its quiet balance again. The son who had forgotten came home, not because he was forced, but because life had humbled him. The father who was once excluded found peace, not through revenge, but through patience. The gift I sent, that small box of memories, had done more than any confrontation ever could. It had reminded him, in silence, of what truly matters. But our story wasn't over yet. Because in every life, forgiveness is only complete when it's tested by love itself. And soon, love would test both of us again, in a way neither expected. Life has a strange way of circling back when you least expect it. Sometimes it's gentle, other times it arrives like a quiet reckoning. Soft steps that echo louder than any scream. A few months after the wedding, I returned to my usual rhythm. Mornings spent walking around the neighborhood, evenings with my old records and a cup of black coffee. I rarely thought about the wedding anymore, at least not in the way that hurt. The ache had dulled into something quieter, something that made me reflect instead of weep. Then one morning, I received an envelope in the mail. It was from Michael. No return address, just his name written in that same sharp handwriting I'd once taught him, back when he was learning to write his name for the first time. My heart hesitated before my fingers even touched it. Inside was a letter, folded twice. The paper was crisp, the ink faintly smudged in a few places, as if it had been written through hesitation. I sat by the window before opening it, letting the morning light fall across the words. Dad, I don't know how to begin this. I didn't invite you to my wedding because I thought you'd make things complicated. I told myself it was for peace, but deep down, I knew it was selfish. When Linda and I opened your gift, there was silence. Everyone stared. Some laughed, some didn't understand. But I did. You sent us that old clock. The one that hung in the kitchen when I was little. The one that stopped working the day Mom left. At first, I didn't get it. But then I realized what it meant. You sent time, something I'd wasted by cutting you out. I'm sorry, Dad. I've been running from the things I didn't want to face. And now I see that I've been carrying more of you in me than I ever admitted. I hope we can talk soon. Michael. The words blurred for a second. I took off my glasses and pressed the bridge of my nose, breathing slowly. The clock. He remembered. That old wall clock had hung in our kitchen for years. Linda, his mother, used to wind it every Sunday morning. The ticking was steady, like a heartbeat in our small suburban house. When she passed away, the clock stopped. I tried fixing it once, but it never worked again. For years it just hung there, frozen at 7:45, marking the time our lives had quietly changed forever. When I sent it as a wedding gift, I didn't plan it as revenge. It was something else. A symbol, maybe. My way of saying, you can stop the clock, but time doesn't stop loving you. I didn't expect him to understand. But he did. That weekend he called. His voice was hesitant, thinner than I remembered, like he was walking barefoot on glass. Dad, he said. Michael, I replied. My tone was calm, not cold, just careful. I got your letter, I said after a moment. I read it twice. I didn't know what else to say, he murmured. I know it's late, but I mean it. I'm sorry. I nodded slowly, even though he couldn't see me. You don't have to rush an apology, son. Time works differently for each of us. There was silence, then a small breath on the other end. Linda's pregnant, he said suddenly. We just found out. For a moment, I didn't speak. My throat tightened with something I hadn't felt in years, pure, unguarded joy. That's wonderful news, I said quietly. Congratulations. Thanks, he said softly. I'd like you to be part of the baby's life. If you want. I smiled faintly. Of course I want that. You don't even have to ask. Over the next few weeks, We started to talk more. Not every day, but often enough to feel real again. The conversations were small at first, about his job, their house, the weather, but underneath, something was healing. Then one day, Michael invited me over for dinner. It wasn't the first time he'd asked, but it was the first time I said yes. The drive to his house felt surreal. The same suburban roads, the same passing families, but I wasn't the same man anymore. I was calmer, lighter somehow. When I reached his doorstep, Linda, my daughter-in-law, opened the door. She looked nervous, her hands twisting the hem of her sweater. "Mr. Bennett," she said with a shy smile. "I'm really glad you came." "Please," I said kindly. "Call me Richard." Inside, the air smelled of roasted chicken and rosemary. The house was warm, tastefully modern, but it didn't feel unwelcoming. Michael appeared from the kitchen, wearing an apron, wiping his hands. He smiled, the same boyish grin I hadn't seen since he was 12. "Hey, Dad." "Hey," I said softly. We stood for a second too long, neither sure what to do. Then he stepped forward and hugged me. It wasn't long or dramatic. Just right. Dinner went smoothly. We talked, we laughed, even reminisced about old memories. But there was one thing that stood out, the clock. It was hanging in the living room. Polished. Working. I stared at it quietly for a long time, the soft ticking filling the room like a heartbeat reborn. "You fixed it?" I asked. Michael nodded. "Yeah. Took me a while, but I got it running again. The first night after I repaired it, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing it tick and realizing how much time I lost by being stubborn." I smiled faintly. "Time has its own mercy, son. It waits for those who learn." He nodded, eyes lowering. "I think I'm still learning." After dinner, as we sat on the porch, he looked at me seriously. "Dad, I need to tell you something." I turned toward him. The evening was calm, the sound of crickets faint in the distance. "I didn't just leave you out because of peace," he admitted. "I was ashamed. You worked so hard your whole life, and I thought you'd make us look small in front of her family. They're rich, successful. I was stupid enough to think that mattered." He looked down. But I realized the only thing that ever made me small was my own pride. I listened quietly. His confession wasn't easy, and I didn't want to interrupt the honesty in his voice. "You don't have to explain," I said after a while. "I understand. We all chase what we think matters, until we lose what truly does." He looked at me, his eyes glistening. "You're not mad." I smiled softly. "No. I'm just glad you found your way back." When I left that night, he walked me to the car. The porch light glowed above us, a soft halo on the steps. "Dad," he said, "that gift, the clock, it changed something in me. I don't think I'll ever forget it." I paused before opening the car door. "It wasn't meant to hurt you," I said. "It was just a reminder." "Of what?" I looked at him, my son older now, wiser, but still the boy I'd raised. "That time doesn't stop loving you, even when you forget it." He nodded slowly, understanding more than words could express. Then he hugged me again, tighter this time. Weeks passed, and I became part of their lives again. I helped Michael repaint the baby's room. I built a small rocking chair from scratch, the way I used to build toy trains when he was little. Sometimes, I'd sit quietly in the nursery, listening to the steady ticking of that clock in the living room. It was like the past had found its rhythm again. But revenge, even when it's quiet, leaves behind a shadow. I remember sitting on my porch one evening, watching the sunset when my neighbor, old Mrs. Thompson, called over the fence. "Richard, you seem lighter these days," she said. "What changed?" I smiled faintly. "Time," I said. "And a broken clock that started ticking again." She chuckled. "You always speak in riddles." "Maybe," I said. "But sometimes that's how healing sounds." What I realized through it all was simple. my revenge wasn't really revenge. It was reflection. I didn't humiliate him. I didn't make him feel small. I just gave him something to think about, a symbol of time, memory, and consequence. And he grew from it. The satisfaction wasn't in seeing him suffer. It was in watching him understand. That's the quietest form of justice, when someone sees their wrongs without you having to raise your voice. And that's when I knew, my story wasn't about being excluded from a wedding. It was about being invited back into a life, not through anger, but through patience. When life starts to heal, it doesn't make a grand announcement. It happens in small, quiet moments. A call returned, a chair pulled closer at the dinner table, a soft laugh after years of silence. That's how it began for us. After that dinner, Michael called me every few days. Sometimes he'd ask about old recipes his mother used to make, sometimes he'd just talk about the baby. Linda had entered her 3rd month of pregnancy, and their excitement filled every corner of their home. For me, those calls were a gift, one I never asked for, but always hoped would come. I didn't tell him this, but every time the phone rang and I saw his name, I'd take a second before answering, to let the joy sink in quietly. One Saturday morning, he showed up at my door without warning. I was pruning the hedges when his car pulled into the driveway. He stepped out, smiling, holding a brown paper bag. "Brought you something," he said, walking up the path. Inside the bag was a slice of homemade apple pie. "Linda baked it," he explained. "She said if you like it, she'll make a full one next week." I chuckled, taking the bag. "Tell her she doesn't need to bribe her father-in-law." He smiled. "She said it's not a bribe. It's peace offering." We laughed, but beneath it, I felt something loosen inside me. There was peace indeed, not forced, not spoken, just naturally settling in. Over the next few months, I spent more time at their home. I helped fix a few things around the house, a creaky cabinet, a leaky faucet, even the baby crib that arrived in pieces one afternoon. When Michael struggled to assemble it, I couldn't help but grin. "You always rushed through things when you were a kid," I said. "Never read the instructions." He sighed, holding a screwdriver. "Some things never change, huh?" I smiled. "Maybe not. But some things get wiser with time." We spent the rest of the day fixing it together. By the time the crib stood firm and steady, the sun was setting, painting the nursery in gold. Michael looked at the crib and said softly, "I hope I can be half the father you were." I froze for a second, my chest tightening. "You already are," I said quietly. "You just needed time to see it." He looked at me, his eyes full of something heavy. Remorse, maybe gratitude, maybe both. When the baby finally arrived, it was a boy. They named him Henry. I still remember that day clearly, the smell of antiseptic in the hospital room, the nervous joy in Michael's eyes as he held his son for the first time. He handed the baby to me, his hands shaking slightly. "Dad," he said, "meet Henry." The moment that small bundle rested in my arms, the world seemed to slow down. His tiny fingers gripped mine, and for a moment, I saw both the past and the future, the boy I'd once held, and the man he'd become. "Hello, little one," I whispered. "You've already brought us back together, and you don't even know it." Michael smiled, his eyes glistening. "He's got your nose." I laughed. "Poor kid." We both laughed then, really laughed without walls or weight between us. As weeks turned into months, my life began to change in ways I never expected. I'd become a grandfather, not just by title, but in every sense of the word. I'd babysit Henry when they needed a break, hum old lullabies, and take slow walks with a stroller through the same park I once walked alone. Neighbors would stop and smile, saying, "You look happy these days, Richard." And they were right. I was. There was a quiet joy in holding that little boy, in feeling the warmth of a family that had once drifted apart but now fit together again. Not perfectly, but genuinely. One evening, Michael and I sat on his porch after dinner. The same porch where months ago we had faced the truth about the wedding. The air was cool, and the distant hum of crickets filled the silence between us. "Dad," he said after a while, "I keep thinking about that gift you sent. That clock." I turned to him. "What about it?" "I realized it wasn't revenge," he said. "You weren't trying to get back at me, were you?" I smiled softly. "No, son. Revenge is loud. What I gave you was quiet, something to make you think." He nodded. "It worked." I leaned back in the chair, gazing at the stars. Sometimes we learn more through silence than through words. I didn't need to tell you how much you hurt me. I just needed you to feel time again, to remember what we both lost. He looked thoughtful, then said quietly, "I did lose time. But maybe we both gained something better, understanding." I turned to him and smiled. "Exactly." The months that followed were some of the happiest of my life. I'd spend afternoons at their house, watching Henry learn to crawl, to laugh, to take his first wobbly steps. One day, as I held him on my lap, I looked up at the old clock hanging on the wall. Its steady ticking filled the room, calm and unbroken. I thought about how time had once been my enemy, how it reminded me of everything I'd lost. But now, it had become my friend again. Every tick was a heartbeat of second chances. Then one evening, something unexpected happened. Michael handed me a small wrapped box during dinner. "What's this?" I asked. He smiled. "Open it." Inside was a wristwatch, a simple one, with a brown leather strap and an engraving on the back. I turned it over and read the words, "For the man who taught me the value of time." I looked up, speechless. "Dad," he said, "I know I can't change what happened. But I want you to know. You never lost me. I was just late finding my way back." I felt tears sting my eyes, but I didn't hide them. "You came back, son. That's all that matters." He nodded, and for the first time in years, I felt peace, complete and simple. One weekend, we gathered for Henry's first birthday. The house was full, friends, family, laughter, the smell of cake and candles. Linda handed me a slice and said warmly, "You know, Richard, Henry adores you. He always calms down when you hold him." I smiled. "Maybe he senses I've had a lot of practice." She laughed, and for a brief second, I saw what forgiveness looks like, not in words, but in the way people choose to include you again. Later that night, after everyone had left, Michael and I cleaned up together. He looked around the house, the decorations half taken down. "You know, Dad," he said, "I used to think weddings were the start of family. But maybe it's the small moments after that really build one." I nodded. "Weddings are just a chapter, not the story. The real story begins when life tests your love, and you stay." He smiled. "You stayed, even when I pushed you away." "I had to," I said gently. "Because love doesn't walk out just because it's not invited." That night, before I went home, I looked once more at the old clock on their wall. It still ticked softly, steady and sure. The same clock that once marked the end of an era was now witnessing a new beginning. It was poetic in a way. Life doesn't erase the past, it repurposes it. The clock hadn't just been repaired, it had been redeemed. And so had we. One quiet morning, months later, I sat on my porch holding Henry in my arms while Michael mowed the lawn. The sun was soft, the breeze gentle. Henry reached up, tugging at my sleeve, and I smiled down at him. "You know," I whispered, "your father once forgot the sound of time. But now he's learned to listen again." He gurgled a laugh, and I couldn't help but chuckle. In that moment, I understood something I'd never grasped before. Sometimes revenge isn't about returning pain. It's about returning truth, gently enough that it teaches, not destroys. That evening, Michael joined me on the porch with 2 cups of tea. He raised his cup slightly. "To time," he said. "To understanding," I replied. We drank in silence for a while, the kind that doesn't need to be filled. Then he said quietly, "Do you ever wish things had been different?" I looked at him, then at the setting sun. "Sometimes," I said honestly. But if they had, maybe we wouldn't have learned what we did.
He nodded.
You think everything happens for a reason? I think everything happens for a lesson, I said. Some people learn through words, others through silence. You and I, we learn through time. As the years went by, that truth stayed with me. I grew older, slower, but happier. Every tick of that clock reminded me that forgiveness isn't weakness, it's wisdom. That revenge doesn't have to be cruel, it can be calm, patient, and full of meaning. And that love, even when forgotten, can return quietly and still feel whole. Sometimes, silence really is the best revenge. Because silence allows understanding to grow, and understanding heals more deeply than any apology ever could. One weekend, we gathered for Henry's first birthday. The house was full, friends, family, laughter, the smell of cake and candles. Linda handed me a slice and said warmly, "You know, Richard, Henry adores you. He always calms down when you hold him."
I smiled.
Maybe he senses I've had a lot of practice. She laughed, and for a brief second, I saw what forgiveness looks like, not in words, but in the way people choose to include you again. Later that night, after everyone had left, Michael and I cleaned up together. He looked around the house, the decorations half taken down. "You know, Dad," he said, "I used to think weddings were the start of family. But maybe it's the small moments after that really build one."
I nodded.
Weddings are just a chapter, not the story. The real story begins when life tests your love, and you stay.
He smiled.
You stayed, even when I pushed you away.
I had to, I said gently.
Because love doesn't walk out just because it's not invited. That night, before I went home, I looked once more at the old clock on their wall. It still ticked softly, steady and sure. The same clock that once marked the end of an era was now witnessing a new beginning. It was poetic in a way. Life doesn't erase the past, it repurposes it. The clock hadn't just been repaired, it had been redeemed. And so had we. One quiet morning, months later, I sat on my porch holding Henry in my arms while Michael mowed the lawn. The sun was soft, the breeze gentle. Henry reached up, tugging at my sleeve, and I smiled down at him. "You know," I whispered, "your father once forgot the sound of time. But now he's learned to listen again." He gurgled a laugh, and I couldn't help but chuckle. In that moment, I understood something I'd never grasped before. Sometimes revenge isn't about returning pain. It's about returning truth, gently enough that it teaches, not destroys. That evening, Michael joined me on the porch with 2 cups of tea. He raised his cup slightly.
"To time," he said. "To understanding," I replied.
We drank in silence for a while, the kind that doesn't need to be filled. Then he said quietly, "Do you ever wish things had been different?" I looked at him, then at the setting sun. "Sometimes," I said honestly. "But if they had, maybe we wouldn't have learned what we did."
He nodded.
You think everything happens for a reason? I think everything happens for a lesson, I said. Some people learn through words, others through silence. You and I, we learn through time. As the years went by, that truth stayed with me. I grew older, slower, but happier. Every tick of that clock reminded me that forgiveness isn't weakness, it's wisdom. That revenge doesn't have to be cruel, it can be calm, patient, and full of meaning. And that love, even when forgotten, can return quietly and still feel whole. Sometimes, silence really is the best revenge. Because silence allows understanding to grow, and understanding heals more deeply than any apology ever could.